The Supreme Court just cleared the way for Donald Trump to restrict mail-in voting, and it lands in advance of the midterms. That is story one. Story two is bigger than it sounds. Officials say the United States is set for the largest mass visa revocation in its history, targeting up to 200,000 foreigners. Then a 50% tariff on Canadian cars, trucks, and steel, and a proposed fee of more than $100,000 to hire a single skilled foreign worker. After that, the Treasury Secretary threatening to cut entire countries out of the dollar, and a royal walking away from a conservation charity that admitted its own rangers abused people. 6 stories, all about money and power, and the ones at the end hit your paycheck as hard as the one at the top. Stay to the end, because the last two change who gets paid and who gets punished. Start with the ruling that could decide how you cast your next vote. The Associated Press reports the Supreme Court has cleared the way for Donald Trump to restrict mail-in voting, and it comes in advance of the midterm elections. AP is running it as a live story, filed under its Supreme Court and 2026 elections coverage, which tells you how fast this one is moving. Here is what the report establishes. There is a Trump order aimed at mail voting. It had been held up. The nation's highest court has now removed that obstacle, and it has done so with the midterms already on the calendar. The AP report we have does not spell out the vote breakdown or the precise scope of the restrictions, so be skeptical of anyone online telling you tonight exactly what is banned and where. What is not in doubt is the timing, and in election law, timing is the entire game. Rules that change close to an election fall hardest on the people with the least slack in their lives: shift workers, rural voters, anyone who cannot spend 3 hours in a line on a Tuesday. Watch next for state election officials issuing guidance and for fresh legal fights over how the order is actually applied. Reported by the Associated Press. Now the number that should stop you. The Associated Press reports the United States is set for the largest mass visa revocation in its history, targeting up to 200,000 foreigners, according to officials. Read that again? Not 200,000 applications denied. 200,000 visas already issued, already relied on, potentially pulled. AP attributes the scale directly to officials, and the framing is historic. Nothing like this has been done before at this size. The reporting we have does not lay out which visa categories are hit or the timeline, and that ambiguity is itself the story, because a person who does not know whether their status survives the week cannot sign a lease, cannot take a job offer, cannot book a flight home. The money angle is immediate. Employers who sponsored these people have already spent on legal fees and training. Landlords, universities, and hospitals in some towns are built on this population. And the enforcement climate around it is not theoretical. AP separately reports a man waiting for his son to return from the USS Lincoln was arrested by Border Patrol, and that 2 Phoenix police officers were arrested and fired after a violent, unreported traffic stop. Watch for the official notices and the lawsuits that follow. Reported by the Associated Press. Next, the one that shows up on a price sticker. The Guardian reports that Donald Trump has announced a new 50% tariff on Canadian cars, trucks, and steel. 50% on vehicles and on the steel that goes into everything from pickup trucks to office towers to the appliances in your kitchen. A tariff is not a fine paid by a foreign government. It is a tax collected at the border, and it is paid by the importer, who is almost always an American company, which then decides how much of it to hand to you. Cars and trucks are the single biggest consumer purchase most households make after a home, and steel is an input in thousands of products that never mention Canada on the label. The political temperature matches. The Associated Press reports Trump telling Canada to fall in line, while Prime Minister Mark Carney rejects subordination. That is not the language of a deal being quietly negotiated in the background. Watch for 2 things next: whether Canada answers with counter tariffs on American goods, and whether automakers announce price increases or shift production. If you are planning to buy a vehicle this year, this is the story that just moved your budget, reported by The Guardian. Here is a number that rewrites the hiring plans of every mid-sized company in America. The Hill reports the Department of Homeland Security issued a new proposed rule on Monday for H-1B visas that would charge a fee of $103,265 for all workers seeking employment in the United States, subject to the annual statutory cap. That is per worker. The notice of proposed rulemaking says the fee would go toward the federal government's costs. Think about who can actually pay that. A trillion-dollar technology company can absorb $103,000 per hire without blinking. A hospital system in a small city trying to staff a specialist unit, a university lab, a growing engineering firm with 11 people cannot. So the practical effect of a flat six-figure fee is not neutral. It sorts employers by size, and it hands the largest players an even bigger advantage in competing for skilled workers. For American workers, the argument cuts both ways. Supporters say a fee this steep pushes companies to hire domestically. Critics say the work simply moves offshore to wherever the engineer already lives. Because it is a proposed rule, there is a comment period ahead, then litigation. Watch that comment docket, reported by The Hill. Now the story where money is the weapon. The Hill reports that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Monday issued a global warning. Countries must cut any financial ties with Iran or risk being cut off from the United States dollar system. The campaign has a name, Operation Economic Outcast, and The Hill describes it as a new economic pressure campaign against the Islamic Republic, launched as the military front has reached a stalemate 6 months into the war. Understand what being cut off from the dollar system means. The dollar is the rail that global trade runs on. Lose access and a bank cannot clear payments, an exporter cannot get paid, an entire national economy starts operating on workarounds. That is why this is aimed not at Iran alone, but at Iran's partners, at governments and banks forced to choose sides. The Associated Press reports Trump's so-called economic D-Day threats have become warnings for countries to sever financial ties with Iran, and that Iran is warning of a harsh response as the United States announces new sanctions. For you, the transmission channel is energy and shipping. Pressure campaigns of this scale historically move oil, and oil moves the price at your pump. Watch which countries comply and which quietly do not. Reported by The Hill. Finish with the one about reputation, which, in the charity world, is the entire balance sheet. The Hill reports that Prince Harry has quit the African conservation charity African Parks after the organization was embroiled in scandal when it admitted that some of its rangers committed human rights violations. Note the wording carefully, because it matters. This is not an allegation that the group denies. According to the report, African Parks itself admitted that some of its rangers committed human rights abuses. Conservation on this scale is not just wildlife photography. It involves armed rangers patrolling vast territory with real power over the people who live at the edges of protected land. When that power is abused, the harm falls on some of the poorest communities on the continent. Now the money question. Big conservation organizations run on donors, government grants, and the credibility that famous names lend them. A high-profile departure is a signal to every institutional funder reviewing its next disbursement, and those reviews tend to come with conditions attached: independent oversight, published findings, changes at the top. Watch whether other patrons and funders follow Prince Harry out the door, and whether African Parks publishes what it found and what it is doing about it. Reported by The Hill. Watch 2 things this week: the guidance state election officials put out on mail voting, and the comment docket on that 6-figure visa fee, because that is where the real fight happens. So tell me, which of these 6 hits your wallet first? The tariff, the visa fee, or the dollar squeeze? Drop it in the comments, hit like if this was worth your 9 minutes, and subscribe for tomorrow's roundup.